The rain fell in relentless sheets, drenching the city under a gray, oppressive sky. Inside the towering mansion on the hill, Jake sat silently at the dining table, his fingers tracing the edge of his untouched dinner plate. The room was cavernous, filled with echoes of silverware clinking against porcelain and the stifling weight of unspoken expectations. His parents, Richard and Linda, sat at opposite ends of the table, their presence as domineering as ever. Ryan, his older brother, smirked faintly from across the table, his polished demeanor masking the disdain he harbored for Jake. Jake had waited for this moment all week, planning, rehearsing, steeling himself to say the words that would change everything. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts. "I've decided to move out," he said, the words hanging in the air like an accusation. Richard's fork clattered onto his plate. For a moment, there was silence, a suffocating void where time seemed to stand still. Then Richard leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you can survive out there?" he scoffed, his tone dripping with mockery. "Fine. I'll give you 3 months before you come crawling back." Linda's face paled, her hands fluttering nervously over her lap. "Jake, sweetheart," she began, her voice laced with condescension. "You don't understand how cruel the world is. You need us. Without us, you're nothing." Her words were meant to soothe, but they landed like daggers, piercing deeper than any insult could have. Ryan chuckled softly, leaning forward with feigned interest. "So, little brother, what's your grand plan? Selling lemonade on the street corner?" His laughter echoed through the room, sharp and cutting, as if daring Jake to respond. Jake clenched his fists beneath the table, his nails digging into his palms. Anger bubbled within him, hot and uncontrollable, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I don't need your permission," he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I'm leaving tonight." No one moved to stop him, not even when he stormed upstairs, dragging suitcases from the closet and throwing clothes haphazardly inside. The rain pounded against the windows as he worked, each droplet a reminder of the chaos brewing both outside and within. When he descended the staircase, dragging his belongings behind him, Ryan stood by the window, watching with a smug grin. "This kid thinks he's so great," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Jake to hear. Outside, the cold bit at Jake's skin as he loaded the rented van under the pouring rain. Each box felt heavier than the last, not just because of its physical weight, but because it carried the burden of years of resentment, rejection, and unfulfilled dreams. No one came to help, not his father, whose pride refused to allow it, not his mother, whose fear paralyzed her, and certainly not Ryan, whose disdain was palpable even from afar. As Jake pulled away from the driveway, the mansion shrinking in his rearview mirror, he stopped at a red light. Rain streaked down the windshield, distorting the reflection of the house until it was nothing more than a shadowy silhouette. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "This is my only chance," he whispered to himself, determination burning fiercely in his chest. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But as the light turned green and the tires rolled forward, Jake knew one thing for certain: he would never look back. The rain had stopped by the time Jake arrived at his new apartment, a cramped, dingy space in the outskirts of the city. The walls were cracked and stained with watermarks, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. It was nothing like the mansion he had left behind, but it was his first real step toward freedom. He dropped his bags onto the floor, the sound echoing hollowly through the empty room. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring out the single grimy window at the flickering neon sign of a nearby convenience store. The reality of his situation hit him hard. His savings were dwindling fast, eaten away by rent and basic necessities. To make ends meet, Jake took on 2 jobs during the day. He worked as a sales associate at an electronics store, enduring endless hours of monotonous tasks. At night, he hustled as a waiter at a bustling diner. The long days blurred together, leaving him exhausted and emotionally drained. Yet, despite the fatigue, Jake clung to one thought that kept him going: the belief that this was temporary. Someday, he would build something of his own. One particularly grueling evening, after a double shift at the diner, Jake trudged home under the dim glow of streetlights. His feet ached, his back throbbed, and his mind felt numb from exhaustion. As he turned onto a quieter street, a group of rowdy teenagers suddenly appeared from the shadows. Before Jake could react, one of them snatched his wallet from his pocket and bolted down the alley. "Hey, stop!" Jake shouted, adrenaline surging through his veins as he gave chase. But the thieves were faster, disappearing into the labyrinth of narrow alleys. Defeated, Jake collapsed onto the curb, his chest heaving as tears streamed down his face. For the first time since leaving home, doubt crept into his mind. Was this all worth it? Could he really survive without his family's support? Meanwhile, Richard sat in his opulent study, nursing a glass of whiskey. A private investigator he had hired reported back, detailing Jake's struggles. "He's barely scraping by," the man said, handing over a folder filled with photos and notes. Richard smirked, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. 3 months, he muttered to himself. That's all it will take. Despite Richard's confidence, Jake refused to give up. Late at night, when the world outside fell silent, he pored over business books and market research, scribbling notes furiously in a worn-out notebook. His dream of starting his own company became an obsession, fueling him through the darkest moments. Matt, ever the loyal friend, often visited Jake's tiny apartment, bringing groceries or just offering words of encouragement. "You're stronger than they think, Jake," Matt would say. "They don't know what you're capable of." As Christmas approached, Jake received an invitation to a prestigious startup conference, a golden opportunity to pitch his ideas to potential investors. Excited but conflicted, Jake hesitated before calling his parents to explain why he wouldn't be coming home for the holidays. The call began innocently enough, with Linda asking casually about his plans. But when Jake revealed his decision, her tone shifted instantly. "You're not coming home?" Linda snapped, her voice sharp but accusatory. "If you don't come, we'll cut off your rent money immediately." Richard chimed in, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you honestly think you can survive without me?" Ryan laughed mockingly in the background. "No one's going to invest in someone like you, Jake. You're nobody." Jake clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath the surface. But instead of lashing out, he responded coolly. "Keep the money," he said, then hung up without another word. As he set the phone down, a strange sense of relief washed over him. For the first time, he felt truly free, not just from their financial control, but from their toxic influence. That night, Jake stepped out onto the rickety balcony of his apartment. The city sprawled below him, its lights twinkling like stars against the dark sky. He leaned against the railing, taking a deep breath of cold winter air. Above him, the heavens stretched endlessly, dotted with constellations he couldn't name. In that moment, Jake made a silent vow. "They'll see me differently," he thought, determination burning fiercely in his chest. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore, it was about building a future where he no longer needed anyone else's approval. The conference hall buzzed with energy, a sea of suits and ties exchanging business cards and animated conversations. Jake stood at the podium, his heart pounding as he presented his startup idea to a room filled with seasoned investors. His voice, though steady, carried an undercurrent of raw determination. He spoke passionately about his vision, a platform that would revolutionize e-commerce logistics, and the audience listened intently. When he finished, applause erupted, louder than any sound Jake had ever heard in his life. Several investors approached him afterward, eager to discuss potential partnerships. A week later, Jake signed a multi-million-dollar contract with one of the largest tech companies in the country. It was a monumental achievement, marking the beginning of his ascent. But for Jake, it wasn't just about financial success. It was validation, proof that he could thrive without his family's support. That evening, Jake dialed his parents' number, his fingers trembling slightly despite his calm exterior. The call connected and Richard's gruff voice answered immediately. "What do you want?" he demanded, clearly irritated. Jake took a deep breath before speaking. "I thought you'd like to know," he began, his tone deliberately casual, "that I've been doing pretty well lately." Linda chimed in, her voice laced with skepticism. "Oh, really? Still surviving on scraps, are you?" Jake allowed himself a small smile. "Actually, I've made some progress. For instance, I bought a house last month." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Linda's voice cracked through the quiet, high-pitched and incredulous. "What did you say?" Richard's voice followed, sharp and disbelieving. "Where did you get the money for that?" Jake shrugged, even though they couldn't see him. "Isn't this what you wanted? For me to take care of myself?" The line went dead. Jake exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of satisfaction and relief. He had dropped the bombshell not out of malice, but because he knew it was time to confront them head-on. In the opulent living room of their mansion, Richard and Linda sat frozen on the sofa, their faces pale with shock. The phone lay abandoned on the coffee table, its screen still glowing faintly. Richard's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. "Who helped him?" he growled, his voice shaking. "Find out who gave him the money." Ryan entered the room moments later, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on?" he asked, his usual smug demeanor faltering when he saw the expressions on his parents' faces. "He bought a house," Linda whispered, her voice trembling. "Without our help." Ryan's eyes widened, then narrowed in disbelief. "How is that possible? There's no way he could afford something like that." Richard grabbed the phone again, dialing furiously. "I'll find out who's backing him. Someone must have funded this. No one does something like that alone." Meanwhile, Jake received a call from Matt, who sounded both excited and concerned. You dropped quite the bombshell, Matt said, laughing nervously. Your dad's people have already started digging around. I expected as much, Jake replied calmly. Let them dig. They won't find anything incriminating, Matt hesitated. Are you sure about this? Your dad isn't someone to mess with lightly. I know, Jake said firmly. But it's time they realized I don't need them anymore. And if they try to interfere, I'll handle it. True to Jake's prediction, Richard soon discovered the truth. Matt had secretly invested in Jake's startup. Enraged, Richard called Matt directly, bypassing all formalities. How dare you go behind my back? Richard spat, his voice icy with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? Matt remained unfazed, his tone calm and measured. I invested in Jake because I believe in him. You can't stop talent like his, not even with your money or influence. Richard slammed the phone down, seething. Meanwhile, Ryan launched a smear campaign against Jake, spreading rumors online and among industry insiders. But instead of damaging Jake's reputation, the move backfired spectacularly. Once word got out about Richard and Ryan's attempts to sabotage Jake, public sympathy swung overwhelmingly in Jake's favor. His partners rallied around him, doubling down on their commitments. One afternoon, as Jake reviewed documents in his new office, a sleek, modern space overlooking the city skyline, his assistant handed him a note. There's a reporter on the line, she said. They're asking about the lawsuit your father filed against the company. Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Let me guess, he claims we stole intellectual property, or something equally ridiculous. Something like that, his assistant confirmed. Jake chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Tell them I'll address it personally. When the reporter pressed him for details, Jake responded with characteristic poise. My father seems to think he can control everything, including my career. But the truth is, I built this company on merit, not privilege. If he wants to play games, fine. Let's see how far he gets. As he hung up, Jake felt a surge of confidence. This wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about proving once and for all that he didn't need anyone else's approval to succeed. The mansion loomed before Jake like a specter of his past, its grandeur now feeling more oppressive than impressive. He hadn't stepped foot inside since the day he left, and as he walked through the heavy wooden doors, the familiar scent of polished wood and expensive leather filled the air. Richard and Linda sat in the living room, their expressions a mix of defeat and desperation. Gone was the arrogance that once defined them. Instead, there was an unsettling vulnerability. Linda spoke first, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. Jake, if you come back home, I'll invest in your company. Whatever you need, we can work it out. Jake met her gaze, his eyes steady and unwavering. For a moment, he considered the offer not because he needed their money, but because he knew how much it must have cost her pride to even suggest it. Yet, deep down, he understood that accepting their help would mean surrendering a part of himself he had fought so hard to reclaim. It's too late for that, he said softly, a faint smile playing on his lips. I don't need your approval anymore. Richard clenched his fists, his face flushed with frustration. You think this is over? You're nothing without us. His words were sharp, but they lacked the venom they once carried. It was clear that Richard's confidence had been shattered, replaced by the bitter realization that he no longer held any power over his son. Jake didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, each step echoing through the cavernous halls. As he reached the threshold, he paused briefly, glancing back at the opulent interior one last time. There was no anger in his heart, only a profound sense of closure. He stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushing against his face, and closed the door behind him with finality. Standing on the driveway, Jake took a deep breath, savoring the freedom he had earned. The weight of years of resentment and struggle seemed to lift from his shoulders as he approached his sleek black car. Before driving away, he pulled out his phone and dialed Matt. Hey, Jake said, his voice tinged with excitement. We're going to build something bigger than they ever imagined, an empire they can't touch. Matt chuckled on the other end. About time you said that. I've been waiting for this call. As Jake ended the call, he glanced up at the towering mansion one last time. Its windows glimmered faintly under the moonlight, but to him, it was just another relic of a life he had left behind. With a determined grip on the steering wheel, he drove off into the night, leaving the mansion and his old life far behind. The next morning, Jake stood in his new office, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape below. The sun had just risen, casting golden hues across the skyline. Cars zipped along the streets far beneath him, their headlights twinkling like stars. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the glass window, and allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. In his mind, he replayed the journey that had brought him here, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt and despair. But above all, he remembered the fire that had kept him going, the unyielding belief that he could forge his own path, regardless of what others thought or expected. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered, holding a folder filled with documents. "Everything's ready for the meeting later today," she said, placing the file on his desk. "Thank you," Jake replied, nodding. As she left, he returned to the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The city stretched endlessly before him, alive with possibility. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The lights of the city reflected in his eyes, shimmering like fragments of a dream realized. A quiet resolve settled over him as he whispered to himself, "This life belongs to those who dare to dream and fight for it." Jake's journey is more than a tale of ambition and triumph, it's a testament to the transformative power of independence. At its core, this story reminds us that true freedom comes not from external validation, but from breaking free of the chains that bind us. For Jake, those chains were forged by his family's toxic control, their love twisted into manipulation. His victory was not merely financial or professional, it was deeply personal, a reclaiming of his identity, his dreams, and his future. The lesson here is clear. Independence is the strongest weapon we possess. Only when we step out of the shadows, cast by others' expectations, can we truly discover our potential. Jake's success wasn't born solely from his talent or ideas. It sprang from his unyielding determination to define his own path, even when every obstacle seemed insurmountable. The sleepless nights, the stolen wallet on a rainy street, the biting words of his father, all these moments tested him, shaping him into someone stronger, wiser, and unshakable. But perhaps the most poignant takeaway is this: family isn't always a sanctuary. While many find solace and support within their homes, for some like Jake, family becomes a battleground where love is wielded as a tool of dominance. Richard and Linda didn't just doubt Jake, they dismissed him, reducing him to a version of himself they deemed inadequate. Ryan's mockery further reinforced this narrative, leaving Jake isolated in a house full of people who claimed to care for him. It was only when he severed those ties that he found clarity, and ultimately, redemption. Finally, Jake's story underscores an undeniable truth: no one can stop someone determined to rise. Despite the odds stacked against him, his family's sabotage, Ryan's smear campaigns, and the weight of societal judgment, Jake persisted. He proves that resilience and grit are far more valuable than wealth or privilege. Matt's unwavering belief in him also highlights the importance of genuine relationships, showing that while blood may tie us to certain people, it is trust and mutual respect that truly sustain us. As Jake stood in his office overlooking the city, the lights reflecting in his eyes, he embodied the essence of perseverance. His life became a beacon for anyone trapped in circumstances beyond their control, a reminder that courage and conviction can rewrite even the bleakest narratives. And so, the message resonates: this life belongs to the dreamers and fighters, those willing to endure pain, defy limits, and carve their own destinies. Jake's journey teaches us that liberation begins with a single step, a decision to no longer live under the weight of another's expectations. Once taken, there's no turning back.